Good afternoon, everyone. We're really, really pleased to see all of you here. Obviously, we've hit a nerve. There's an important conversation that has to be had in our community about transportation. My name is Victoria Armstrong. I am the director of Bike Walk Tompkins, which is now a fundamental part of the Center for Community Transportation. And the founder of the whole thing is Jennifer Dotson, formerly director of Ithaca Carshare and now the executive director of the Center for Community Transportation. And she's really the reason you're here, because she met this incredible speaker many years ago, remembered him, and then saw him again speaking in Paris at the Car Sharing Association's international conference in Paris. That's where she goes in the fall. No animosity at all. So I would like to thank first, before we get to the fabulous speaker who was in Paris, and he's been in Australia and Greece and California and every form of transportation he knows, it's in his blood, but he'll tell you more about that. But before him, I just want to really thank the group that sort of came together under Jennifer's enthusiasm to become this transportation network on the fly to bring Tim here. So first of all, the Downtown Ithaca Alliance, particularly Fred from the board, thank you, and hold your applause. And Matt Yarrow and Pamela from TCAT, and Scott Vanderpool, of course. ITCTC, that's the Ithaca-Tompkins County Transportation Council under the helm of Fernando de Aragon. Dwight Mangle with DSS. Way to Go with Way to Go, CCE. Cooperative Extension, no, that's CCE, sorry, I got this, no, who else? The city and the town and the county folks, and of course our entire team at the Center for Community Transportation, which also includes Hector Chang and Anna Cook, who are here. Okay, so that's everybody who brought this to you. And who are we going to listen to, and who's going to spark this conversation, giving us a sort of a global sense of where transportation is at and what we can do? Well, his name is Tim Papandreou. He lives and works in the San Francisco area. He currently runs his own company called the Emerging Transport Associates. Got it. He's worked on the frontier of transportation with Google X and Waymo. He was the he is the strategic advisor and co-founder of City Innovate, and he was the chief of innovation for the Metropolitan Transportation Agency in San Francisco. So all of those innovative things that were happening in San Francisco, he was part of that, and he made it like a living laboratory, so he may touch on some of that as well. So these are the things he's going to address from his experiences, or he's going to address much more. And on that note, I would like you to give a big round of applause and make him welcome Tim Papandreou.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's always great to be here in mid-January. I really enjoy it. Just a quick way of background before we go into this. So the last name, most of you may know, that actually is a Greek name. This is the name of a Greek town. And my honeymoon was actually in Ithaca in Greece. So there's some nice connections there. And if you think that Ithaca, New York is gorgeous, you should see Ithaca, Greece. But there's a reason why you were named after that place, because it truly is magnificent, and there's a lot of great ideas that came out of that place a couple of thousand years ago, and continue to come out of here with your magnificent university and everything else you have around here. So a lot of great assets that you have, and I believe you're one of the very few places, frankly, in this part of the region where things are moving forward in a way that are really exciting, but it's also creating some challenges and some issues. So hopefully one of the key messages that I'll pull along as we go through this big journey is that every place has their different issues and opportunities. It's a matter of scale. And so what can we do with that and how can we address those is by working together. So there's some of the things that we'll talk about as we go through. So that's my company name, there's my email and handle there. And has anybody, who's been to San Francisco, if I may ask? Oh wow, you guys travel a lot. Okay, well there's no direct flights, I can tell you that. Well, that's okay, that's okay. So this is downtown San Francisco, and right here is the newest development. Right here, if you can see all the way at the back there, this is actually the Transbay Center, which is the largest new infrastructure that we've had in the region for a very long time. It's a big bus terminal for our regional, local, and state bus services. It's also, the box has been laid for the high-speed rail terminal and the regional rail terminal as well. But in that process, we used our tax increment financing and our different levers we have in the city to redistrict this whole zone around here. You see a little bit how it hasn't been built yet, but all this has got redistricted, and all of the value capture from the new development actually paid for this infrastructure. And as part of the betterments for the community, we created a 4-block downtown park on the top. So this is the kind of stuff you can do when everybody from the land use side, the transportation side, the community benefits district side, the business improvement side, everybody got together and said, how can we do this in a way that's different from what we normally do? Because otherwise, it would have been a 2-story concrete box, which was the way that you would have done it in the past. So we had an opportunity to do things differently. So hopefully you'll see more of these inspiring opportunities as we go through this presentation, so you can see that a lot of things can be done differently. So I just want to caveat, I've got a very weird accent because I was born in Melbourne, Australia. I was raised there for a little bit. I went to school in Los Angeles, in Mumbai in India, and also in Brazil. So I have this weirdo accent. So just bear with me. If it doesn't make sense, just like hold for a second. It'll make sense. So yeah, just want to let you know that. But my great-great-grandfather migrated from Southern Europe through Ellis Island many generations ago. Worked on the railroads to California. The story goes, people change the story all the time, but the story goes that someone left and went back to Europe, had one of the kids decided to have another kid, had their kid, who took the ship through the Suez Canal to Australia, which was a 6-week voyage, by the way, had their kid, who had me, and then I flew to California, went back to where my great-great-grandfather was. So, in all that, there was plane, trains, and automobiles. So, transportation, as Vicky said, is in my blood. So, just to start off with some big information. These are all the cities in the world, and everybody's city is important, everybody's city is unique, but what's happening across the world is that the cities are growing, and they're growing really quickly. More than half the world lives in cities now, and very soon we're going to have more than 3/4 of the population of the world living in cities. So in effect, we're turning our planet into a planet of cities. And what that means is that if more than 1/3 of the population is going to move back into cities across the world, we can't move the people and their things with the current technologies and the current things that we have today. There's just physically not enough space. So it's really important to think of the big picture of how do we move people and their things and connect them to the moments of their lives in different ways than we've done in the past, because the solutions of today are not the solutions of tomorrow, because people are changing very quickly and very rapidly. So it's a big high-level point there. I'm just going backwards, sorry. The other thing is that technology is playing much more of a role in our daily lives, more than we like to think, or more than we actually would want to see, but the fact of the matter is that technology is very present and omnipresent. And in this world of technology, we call these segments of our society, and there's been these interesting situations where a company or 2 companies or 3 companies are starting to basically be the dominant provider of those services. Google basically manages all the world's information. There is really nobody else that does it like they do. Facebook knows more about your social life than you do, and that comes with lots of positives and negatives, depending on how you think about that. Amazon is now moving almost half the world's online retail, and it's moving very quickly to move all the world's retail very soon. And LinkedIn knows more about the economy than the economists in each of the nation state or state governments because of the interactions that are happening. On entertainment, Netflix is becoming incredibly popular, but right behind it is YouTube. A fun fact, about 6 years ago, 1 in 100 people would watch a YouTube clip pretty much a couple of times a week. Now it's 1 in 4 people watch a clip more or less every day. So it's the world's largest broadcaster now. And so these are all platforms that have grown in very short time, and it's something that's interesting to note that how technology has been moving at such a rapid pace. The next frontier for technology is mobility, and how will technology play a role in mobility, and what can it do in that space? You know, technology and mobility have seen some tremendous changes in the last 5 to 6 years. 10 years ago, the last 60 years basically, transport was pretty much the same. We didn't really do many things differently. But the last 6 years we saw a tremendous change in transportation because of the development of these 4 convergent technologies. These symbols should be fairly familiar, except for the one on the far right. On the left is the cell phone signal. Most of us hate it when we get 1 bar, but we do get about those 4 bars. But digital cell phone service, GPS, that point that basically identifies where you are or where you are around you, the development of smartphones, and then this is called an application planning interface, or an API. That's basically the link that allows apps to actually work. All those apps that you use or that your friends and family use, that's what allows these 4 things to happen. Without those 4 connections, we couldn't have had things like online payment or you know, sending photos and that sort of stuff. It just wasn't going to happen. But this is what created transportation technology platforms like mobile payment and mobile taxi, Uber, Lyft, etc., bike share, car share, ride share, all those different things that have allowed for this to be able to like route, book, and pay on the fly. All technology is great except when it doesn't work for us, and anybody under a certain age, if they see these 3 symbols, start getting hives. So when your battery is crazy low and you've got another hour to go, when the Wi-Fi is not working or when your app isn't loading, just watch any of those who have kids who are just entering school, or most of the Cornell students. This causes them hives. So you know, we need to sometimes take a break from technology and realize that it's not all that glitter that gold is. All that glitter is not gold, right? So we have to be very, very mindful of its limitations and understand its limitations. Some technology is around to stay because it really, really works. This is the most advanced human-to-machine integration we've ever seen, and we'll probably ever see for the time being. It's the only mobile device that actually charges you, and that's one of the things that I think is really important about technology. When I worked at Google X, one of our famous sayings was that the best technology happens in the background, not in the foreground. We all love Wi-Fi because we can't see it, but we love it when it works, right? But those phone notifications that keep pinging you every 5 seconds, that's not helpful. That's actually really annoying, and it's something that we don't like to see. So all those loud buses on different transport services that kind of ping and make those really loud noises, that sort of stuff's very annoying. Latest is when you put your credit card in those new machines, it goes bam, 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 bam to take it out. Those sounds have been designed to upset you to take your card out, right? But we don't need that kind of technology to be around for the longest time, because that's not helpful. So just remember that when we think about technology, it should be in the background and it should be helpful, not annoying. Here's the scene of technology, right? We hear about, oh, technology is horrible, look what it's done to our society, it's made us antisocial, people aren't talking to each other, there's no community anymore, we've lost all those things. How many times have you heard these discussions? Yes, and it's such a new thing, and back in my day we were so social, and we talked to everybody, and we did all these good things. Let me show you something from 100 years ago. Okay? So, what's the difference here? The iPads are much bigger. You know? The iPads are this big. And we're still waiting for our transportation service, but in the meantime, they could be talking to each other, but no one wants to talk to each other. So, you know, it's a human nature thing. Sometimes technology is blamed for things, but actually it's just us, because at the end of the day, we're in control of our technology. And then there's new technology that comes in and says, you know, oh, look at this disruption, these things are awful, people are tripping over them, and they're leaving them everywhere, and these scooters are awful, what can we do? Look who's riding these scooters. And show me if these riders would ride something else if it wasn't made interesting and enjoyable. What's new is old, what's old is new, because while this is like considered a brand new issue for many cities, we've had this technology for a very long time. This is the post office workers from the 1930s who actually had very similar scooters, and they were actually become unfashionable because people wanted to move over to automobility and work with cars. So we've always had this issue of which technology is the best for which situation and for when, and the common thing that we found is that where there isn't a coordinated approach to making sure that everybody's different needs are actually incorporated, included in these discussions, we end up having to blame the technology. And I think that's one of the things we need to be very mindful of is, it's not the technology, it's how it's being used or not being accommodated. That's really the key. So if this is something that can be accommodated and used in your community, so be it. If it cannot be accommodated or used in your community, then make the case clear so that the technology can basically respond to the needs of what it's chosen for. What's interesting is that technology like this has been used for not just transporting your mail, but these were the first suffragettes. And without this technology, they wouldn't have got their word around. So I think it's something important to note that back then, women weren't allowed to wear pants. They had to wear long gowns, and for specific reasons other than just looking nice. It didn't allow you to like run or do things that you were very unladylike. But this was the big shift that was happening at that time. So transportation has always been part of not just connecting people to things, but also part of big movements, activism, etc. It's all part of their overall approach. So let's go fast forward to this image. So when we look at the automobile, we see that we're sold this amazing, amazing experience of like, look at this fantastic thing, look at this gorgeous scenery, it's always on this peaceful road where we're driving. It's a red car, so it makes you look sexier and cooler, and you're going to get the boyfriend or the girlfriend or both, depending on what your orientation is, doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is that this will improve your life by orders of magnitude, and that when you do decide to ultimately buy this vehicle, you're stuck with it, and then what you really buy is this. And you say to yourself, wait a second, I wanted to get this, but this is what I ended up with. And so that's the situation we have in transportation, is that we are sometimes promised some amazing things, but because we don't do the outcomes together, we end up with a lot of these issues that we don't agree with. Whether it is the technology itself is actually not good for us and we don't agree with it, or the end up using of too much space on our city streets and land that ends up costing us to maintain that we can't afford. So we have to look at this from a much bigger perspective of what is the purpose of moving people and things, and what's the most efficient and effective way to actually do that, that meets all of our needs, not just the elite or the most removed from society, but everybody. You know, when we design our technology and our transportation specifically for all users, especially the most vulnerable users, it actually helps everybody. But when we do it the other way around, it helps no one. And that's the outcome of that. We've done it for a specific group, which has helped nobody. So there's just some of the lessons to learn. So when we look at our transportation system, we see, wow, there's a lot of inefficiencies in our transportation system. So when everybody buys a car, what happens when you buy a car? Well, you use it for about 5% of the day, and most of the time, even though it has 5 seats in it, it's 80% empty. That's not a really good use of a resource. And then if you do have public transport, which many places in the world actually don't have public transport, so those that do, it's really busy in the morning and in the evening during the rush, but most of the time it's actually empty. So you have these large 40-foot vehicles that are not being really well utilized. So basically we have a binary policy system that funds and really pushes for moving vehicles rather than connecting people with their places. And I think that needs to change, and that's currently changing underway. What we also found is that there's a lot of problems with this technology that we have right now. You know, these vehicles are responsible for sometimes up to 3/4 of our air pollution in our regions. Worldwide, they're responsible for the way that they're driven by people. These things don't drive themselves, not yet. These things are driven by people, and they kill about 1.2 million people a year. It's a really important number to remember because that's about the equivalent of a 737 falling out of the sky every day. And so if that happened just once with the aviation industry, we would shut down aviation tomorrow. But for some reason, a person dying every 24 seconds by being killed by a car is actually just the cost of doing business for our society. And we shouldn't accept that. And a lot of cities are stepping up and saying, no, that's unacceptable. The other thing is that when we spend our time in our cars, the average American is spending about 10 days of their lives a year in a car. So most people get 10 days of vacation, so you're spending an extra 10 days in a vehicle, which is really unhealthy for many, many reasons. And then I think one of the most forgotten components is that over 15% of our population, our adult population, has some form of disability or mobility impairment that doesn't allow them to be able to maintain a full-time job because they can't operate a vehicle all the time. And that's a significant amount of people who are excluded from our society from getting an economic opportunity. So if we really do care about people who are vulnerable in our society, who also have physical impairments of some kind, that's an economic development issue to ensure that people have other ways to get around, not just relying on a car. So this binary system, by all measures, is starting to sunset. We've seen a lot of indications around the world that the idea of either owning your own car or only relying on fixed route public transport is starting to shift. And that shift is being slowly replaced by this idea of a multimodal integrated transportation system that focuses, number one, on walking, and that walking is the primary mode to get around because we all have our 2 feet, which don't cost anything unless you need to put fancy shoes on. And that allows us, hopefully, to be able to do most of the things. Regardless of which mode of transportation you're in, we always begin and end every trip as a pedestrian because we walk to everything and we walk from everything. So let's be mindful of that. That's why it should always be at the top of any of your transportation strategies. And then on the left-hand side are the modes of transport that are the most sustainable from a space equivalent, an energy efficiency equivalent, and from a human power equivalent. And then the ones on the right are the ones that are the most efficient and effective if you have the land development and the density that actually allows for these things to happen. It doesn't make any sense to have the options on the right if you don't have the density to back it up. So these are really important overall frameworks of how to see and treat which are the right modes of transport for the particular environment that you have. Ideally, in an environment that is a couple of miles wide by a couple of miles, bicycling and walking are the most efficient and effective ways to get around. But for those who can't bicycle or can't walk, having some sort of public transport service, especially for those that aren't able to physically operate or balance on a bicycle, are really important. Everything else is a nice to have, honestly. That's really the fundamental difference there. And when you look at these are the number of this is a car analysis of the length of trip and the percentage of trips by car. So the car is at the top and the percentage at the bottom. 2/3 of all trips in the US by car are less than 5 miles long. So if you think about that, that means that 2/3 of the trips that are less than 5 miles long could easily be done by any of the modes other than your own car, because that's the viability of whether it's a bicycle or a scooter or a train or a ride-hailing vehicle. Only 1/3 of our trips in the US are over 6 miles and less than 25 miles, and that can easily be achieved with a car-sharing vehicle or a ride-sharing vehicle or some sort of van pool service or express bus, and you see them, they're all outside here. And then only about 10% of all of our trips are more than 26 miles long, and then the 30-40 mile trips, and they can easily be done by car sharing or some sort of car rental service. So to give you the idea that all of these different ideas now are starting to peel away this idea that you need to own and operate your own car. You can use all these different services for the different needs that you have throughout the day, throughout the environment. What's interesting is that behind all of this is this trend of this convergence of three major issues. Focusing on sharing, how do we utilize our existing capacity, especially important for rural areas, because creating brand new services in rural areas is very expensive, and the unit economics, the cost effectiveness is not there, and it requires a lot of subsidy, and it's very difficult to maintain that over time. But what we do know is that even in the most rural of rural areas, there are a few people that actually own some cars, and it's actually quite easy to connect those people to those cars to provide a community service that has basically no overhead cost. So there are ways to look at this. You don't have to all have bikes and this and everything else. You can actually have whatever you have right now, but just share it, because there are always those empty seats in every single car, no matter where they are in the country. And we're moving towards more electrification and then more automated services as well. So that's the big high level. Let me actually focus now on what's happening in California and what I did when I was working for the city. So this is the Bay Area right there. Most of you in the audience said that you've actually been there. This is San Francisco. It's quite a small municipality. It's 7 by 7 miles, but it's part of a metropolitan area of about 8 million people. And in the city of San Francisco, there's about 1 million residents and about 1 million workers. So it doubles in population basically during the day compared to nighttime. So it has a big swelling of people in the city. San Francisco is a place of a lot of activism, and we got our flavor just before, but this is San Francisco style. We have a lot of different types of activism. We're an incredibly diverse and inclusive culture. We're not smarter than anybody else, but we have a culture of openness, and we have a culture of very direct democracy and dialogue on what is important. Here is a situation on the right-hand side where these are tech workers who are protesting the Google technology bus, the Lime scooters, and the other shuttles in the area because they fundamentally disagree with this approach for city policy and planning. Right behind them are protesters from different low-income workers groups who say that those different devices allow them to access other places that they couldn't access before. So we have always the left and the right and the up and the down and the forward and the back having dialogue, and the whole point of this is to listen, learn, and figure out what works and what works best. And we've done this many times. Sometimes Mother Nature is our best activist. This was a double-deck freeway that circled the center of San Francisco. Many of you probably don't know that this was there, but will recognize this photo. This is the Embarcadero. That used to be ensnarled by a double-deck freeway, and we had an earthquake where Mother Nature was the ultimate urban design and said, no cool, and no bueno, as we say, and they said, this is actually what we're going to do. So, but the state fought with the city and the community for a decade about what to do. Should we rebuild it? It took a lot of effort. I'm talking like full-on drag-out fistfights, verbal fistfights, on what to actually do with this space. And it wasn't until we all got together and said, no, we wanted a place that moves and connects people, not that moves vehicles, through charrette after charrette after charrette. These workshops, that we finally came to the agreement that it actually makes more sense to create an outdoor living room for everybody rather than a traffic sewer for those who come through the region. That was a really hard decision. This required state legislation, it required federal approvals, all of these big moves. So it wasn't an easy thing. I can show you this. Look how easy it was. Just did it. No. This was a lot of work. So don't be fooled about how hard it is to get things done and get it going. But what that created was a big position shift at the state. So the state passed one of the world's first Global Warming Solutions Act. As part of that Global Warming Solutions Act, we enacted a transportation and land use layer inside that Global Warming Solutions Act that required us to actually integrate transportation, land use, energy, water, and waste for each region in the state, and what was called a sustainable community strategy. And then each city was required to basically provide its input, how it was going to be part of that, and then we had to create a budget and a plan towards that. All of this was technically voluntary, but when the state kind of nudges, you kind of have to do it. So this is an interesting opportunity to say, well, how does our state and federal transportation network actually look compared to our regional network and then our local network, and how do they all feed each other? So this is the first time we actually got to do a fully integrated assessment of what's the purpose of the city network, what's the purpose of the regional network, and what's the purpose of the state and federal network. And in the city network, it was about moving people short distances all the time using the most efficient modes. The regional network was high capacity, high speed, and the state network was also high capacity, high speed. So it's very different approaches to the regional state network compared to the local city network, which was about moving people in the safest and most efficient way. And what that meant was we could tie our transportation to our overall climate action plan. And I was part of the team that helped develop the climate action plan, where we focused on zero waste, send nothing to the landfill, 50% clean transportation. That was basically our mode split goal. We wanted to get 50% sustainable mode share goal, 100% renewable energy, and then more importantly, focusing on composting and carbon capture through carbon farming. Because what we would do is we'd collect all of the waste in the city, send it over to the vineyard regions up in the valley, Napa Valley, and those other areas, compost it, and we could find a direct connection by doing different types of carbon farming. So these four pillars of our climate action plan were really important, and frankly it was the transportation piece that actually brought this along, because it had the most promise, because it was so bad, right? There was just so much going on that it could fix. So we had a big culture shift inside the agency that I worked on, and we kind of used to use this mantra every day and say that, you know, the most dangerous phrase in our language is, well, we've always done it this way. You know, how many times have you heard that at a meeting that you spoke to a city official or a city planner or a transportation planner? How many times have city staff heard that from their directors or their counterparts? It's like, well, this is how we do it. Well, no, we can't do that anymore, because the world's changing and things are changing around us. We have to think of different ways. And you need to start thinking about this in a different form. We had planners and engineers, oil and water, right? And I had to create a vinaigrette out of this. As the Chief Innovations Officer, you know, I like my salads, you know, in California we love our salads. So I said, okay, we have the planners, we have the engineers, they don't really like each other, they don't really talk to each other. They're very good skill sets. One is really good at solving complex problems, one is really good at articulating complex problems, but they're very, very different roles. How about we create plan-gineers? You know, we blend them together, so we have teams of planners and engineers working on the same problem, utilizing different skill sets. And so we thought about different ways to have collaborations with the community as well. We used to have a situation where there'd be a person, not like me, but someone like me, up the front talking. Someone would get up, everyone would yell at each other, they'd leave the room really upset and angry. And instead we said, how do we actually have more engaged collaboration around these very thorny, hard topics, where we can have some dialogue and really start to determine what are the best outcomes. We started doing things like taking our elected officials on bike rides throughout the city for them to experience for themselves what their constituents are actually saying is needed in their area. We also brought in different people from different parts of the economy, whether they were homeowners or business owners or employers or employees or recent arrivals, and we brought them all on bicycles to basically navigate the city, because when you're on a bicycle, it's the right speed to really experience the city. You're going fast enough that you feel like you're moving and getting there, but you're going slow enough that you can really experience what's actually going on. And so we started having a lot of these different bike rides to see, well, what's it like? And then every time we'd open up a new project, which was basically having to win World War III every single time with these projects. I'm not going to lie, this was really hard work. We would celebrate them so that we could actually see that not just the advocates or the business owners or the transportation staff, everybody was being celebrated for their effort in really making it a better project for everybody. And we tied this down to specific targets and goals. We developed a very clear strategy that we need mixed-use land use development, we need travel demand management, so we developed a whole TDM strategy across the entire city. We need to have parking and traffic management, because those three levers really determine what our transport system can actually function like. And then from there we figured out, well, based on that, if we can manage the demand up the top, we can start supplying the city now with better walkable streets and spaces, a better updated local and regional transit network, and better bicycle network and facilities, and then a new area for vehicle sharing and shuttles and partners and all the new technologies. So basically not saying that we're not going to do that, but that really that's the icing on the cake, and the real fundamental is walking, public transport and bicycling. That's the basis of our transportation strategy. And we made very clear goals because without a baseline measurement, you can't tell if you're improving. You can't tell how you're doing. So you can talk all you want about all the different types of services that you need, but what's the baseline metric? Where are you starting from? For example, I can't say, I'm going to lose 10 pounds, I'm going to do it. I have to weigh myself first to figure out, well, how much do I weigh right now, and then how do I get towards my goal? There have to be processes of measurement to get there. So what we did is we developed a baseline, and we determined that in 2011, two-thirds of all of our trips in the city to from or within San Francisco were by personal car, and that's where we had so much congestion. We had a good walking rate of 17.5%, a small biking rate about 3.5%, and about 17% by transit. So all in all, we basically combined all of those as sustainable mobility. So we said the blue was car travel, and the 38% was by sustainable mobility. And to make it simple so that everybody in the community could understand what our goal was, we had a 50-50 goal. We said we want to, in 7 years, we want to get to 50% driving and 50% non-driving. And that really resonated. People stuck with it. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We're not sure how we're going to get there, but with all of your help together, we're going to figure out how to actually do it. And we're going to check in every 3 months and tell you the progress we're being made, and we're going to ask you for your help. So that's what we did. And we developed, for the first thing was to develop our open database, so we could start measuring all of our progress, whether we're counting bikes or buses or trains or cars, whatever it was. We created an open database so we could show what was there and people could use the data. We had to do this, I call this policy acupuncture. It's basically threading all of the different transportation planning documents that we have to do in San Francisco. You think your job is difficult? Think of this. We have 10 plans that we have to coordinate, and they're all saying very different things. It doesn't matter what a plan says, it's where the money is going that you should be focusing on. So all plans can say the most amazing things. Everybody deserves ice cream and free beer, but if all the money is going to widen roads, that's your policy, right? So I think that was one of the things we did first. We also did something that was very revolutionary in the city. We focused on people's work plans. We said, how does your work plan feed the division's work plan, which feeds all of this stuff? And now we could actually say, you as the street cleaner, you as the transit attendant, you as the bus driver, your role is tied into this overall strategy. So everybody got empowerment and everybody got ownership into the strategic plan. We had 6,000 staff at SFMTA, and we had about 95% attendance during the strategic planning process. And the only reason why the other 5% couldn't attend is because they were physically driving the buses or stripping the suites. So we'd actually go on our bicycles or actually ride the bus and do the workshop in the bus with them as they're driving. So there was ways to engage people in ways that hadn't been engaged before, so they could actually see what this meant for them. And then we actually worked with our local planning department, because our local plan department would bring us into agreements at the 11th hour. We used to call it the 11th hour team. And the plan department would say, look, we're about to sign this new land use plan. We're going to do this new zoning requirement. You guys are good, right? It should be fine. I'm like, no, we're not good at all. This is awful. You're going to add all these cars. We've just agreed to shift modes. It's going to impact the transit system. You're going to slow down the bus. Every minute we slow down in our transport system costs us millions of dollars, blah, 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 blah. So we got ourselves in front of the land use planning team early. We basically said, hi, we're here. We want to talk about this land use plan. And we go to the developers saying, are you going to go to the city for any planning ideas soon? You need to talk to us first. And there's no legal requirement for them to do that, but we made ourselves required to do that. And the saying I used to say was that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you want to be at the table to have that discussion rather than being on the menu. And so what we did is, for the first time, we worked with the planning team to say, okay, this is where the growth areas are based on those state and local requirements. This is the impacts to the transport system that's going to happen. How do we work together so we can actually make those changes happen? And you'll see some of these examples. So we also started looking at our land use and saying, wow, land use and transport are very closely tied, clearly. This was a freeway that also got demolished because of the earthquake, and we worked very closely with the city to basically re-knit all these streets and create this was literally the freeway above. The freeway used to be right here. So all these residents in these houses could touch the freeway if they reached out of their windows. When that got demolished, everyone said hallelujah, and then we started redesigning all these spaces for people. And this was the last parcel that was created in that space as it all got redeveloped. And now if you walk through the area, you'll never know that there was an elevated freeway through this area because we worked very closely together. We had a lot of arm wrestling. It wasn't all happy, skipping together. The planning department has some very specific requirements, and so does the transport team, but together we figured it out. And we also worked them very closely on figuring out where should new development go. There's a lot of pressure to keep this area very as it is, but the city's growing. You can't stop cities from growing. Cities are growing because cities have people in them. Cities are not about buildings and streets. Cities are about people. And as more people come, or more people are born, you need to put them somewhere. Otherwise, what happens, like what's happening in San Francisco, all the NIMBYs say no to everything, and the bananas come in, which is build nothing, never again. And yeah, bananas are build nothing, anywhere, never again. And what that means is, your rents go through the roof. And the people you were trying to protect in the first place are the first to be displaced. So you have to accommodate growth in a respectful way that keeps people housing and aging in place while allowing newcomers to actually have a place to live. It doesn't work any other way. And you've seen San Francisco now jump from $2,000 a month for one-bedroom apartment to $4,000 a month for one-bedroom apartment because of this situation. And so now the governor has actually just announced that we have to desperately build 3.5 million housing units in the next 5 years, otherwise it's going to go even higher across the whole state. So, lesson learned, don't repeat our mistakes, right? Number one. And then here's that development I was talking about, where we rezoned this entire area to accommodate all of that growth and development, and to also make these changes for all these different community needs and benefits. We also did some really miraculous things where this is the Presidio. The Presidio was cut in half from the waterfront and from the parks. These are the old army barracks from the early days. And then we developed a program to basically underground this segment of the highway that goes to the Golden Gate Bridge to create basically a doubling of open space in this area and reconnecting all of those park areas to the community. What is a transport agency going to do with that? It's about moving and connecting people, and that's what people want us to do. So that's the sort of work that we did together. We also didn't forget that people do drive and they do need to park, and we can't just expect everybody to shift tomorrow to walking and cycling, although that'd be amazing. The reality is that there are certain people that just can't do that for so many other reasons. So we figured out how do we get people to their parking spots in the quickest and cheapest possible way. And that was through our SF Park program. We also worked with the car sharing companies and asked them what do they need to scale in a city. Like, we know that for every one car share vehicle we have in a city, people end up giving up or getting rid of 9 to 13 cars. So that's a huge shift from just one car share vehicle. So we thought, well, what if we offered hundreds of on-street spaces, because one of the biggest complaints we heard was that people don't know that car sharing even existed, and if we made it visible on the street, they would actually see that it existed and they could hopefully use it. And we did that, and we actually offered about 500 on-street spaces, which basically doubled the car sharing fleet, and it allowed a lot more people to utilize those vehicles while giving up their second or even their first car, which was a great big change. And on the parking side, we focused on actually getting people to their parking spots with very clear signs of where they can park and where they can't park and how much it costs. And that was a really great indication for those who need to use it. It also helped the merchants as well, because they could see who actually in fact was using the parking spots and how they're being utilized both on-street and off-street. We also used data to understand where are people getting killed in our streets by people driving. And we found that while most people thought it was all over the city, only 12% of our street miles were responsible for 75% of our severe collisions and fatalities. So it wasn't a citywide problem, it was a very specific area problem. And that using data and understanding where people basically were being exposed allowed us to basically help us to redesign those streets to make them safer so we could reduce the number of collisions and fatalities in the city. We also started looking at experimental things where we would actually start looking at what was the cause of these crashes. 9 out of 10 times, the cause of crashes in those areas were either speeding, not paying attention, driving under the influence, and particularly along transit streets, where this is Market Street, one of our busiest transit streets, the majority of collisions with the transit system were people in their own cars. So we used the data to basically say, okay, if we could remove private cars from the street, what would happen to the street? Of course, everybody screamed the world's ending, because how could you do that? This is the United States, the car is king, yada, 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 even in San Francisco. And so we said, well, why don't we do a pilot? So pilot is our word for let's try something. And so we tried it for about 6 months. This was the different elected officials, representatives of the different districts, the advocates for street safety, and our Department of Public Health was my co-lead in the Vision Zero movement. So we had the Transport Department and the Department of Public Health, our head epidemiologist, working together to figure out how to do this. And we noticed that immediately all the collisions basically went away, because the culprit, which was the person in their car driving down Market Street, was no longer crashing into the buses. So from a safety perspective and from an overall movement, people walking, people cycling, people taking transit are all now moving through the corridor much safer because of removing that one, the mode that was just incompatible with that street. On the parking program, for those that do still need to drive, we wanted to make it easy to get to parking, and so we developed a program where we started charging for all of the on-street spaces that were needed and changing the prices based on demand. So many of you may have heard of this concept, but what we would do is we would allow people information up front of how much it would cost to park in certain parts of the city based on demand, and if the area was in high demand, the price was higher, and if the area was in lower demand, the price was lower. So we're trying to encourage people to go to the lower priced areas so they wouldn't impact the transport system. 1/3 of our congestion when we were doing this study was actually people looking for a parking spot. They're just circling for a parking spot. And that congestion was holding up all of our transit system, which, remember, every minute of delay on our transit system is millions of dollars of wasted dollars. So there's a direct connection between our transit agency needs and our driver needs to make sure that both could be served by developing this demand management program for on-street and off-street parking. And the results speak for themselves. Sorry? That's a sensor in the ground. Yeah. So the sensor in the ground there is basically measuring how long a person has stayed there and how much they have to pay. In the pilot itself, we found that in the areas where we had the pilot, we had a 30% decrease in congestion, in emissions, and in wait time as well. So the pilot was very successful, and we decided to scale it across the city. So again, pilots are critical because rather than spinning your wheels, arguing for years about whether you should do something, you can do it in a couple of months and see, does it actually work? And if not, what can you do to tweak it to make it better? And then on our street side, we wanted to figure out ways we could make our streets more inviting. We started doing a lot of, we call it read the street. We started looking at the street and saying, why are we using so much of our street space for the least amount of occupants in a vehicle? And we started counting that, look at the difference in this street where there's one person in one car and they take up this entire lane and it looks congested. Congestion is actually is an optical illusion to you. You think it's congested because you see cars all backed up. If you count the number of people in the cars, it's about 15, 20 people in a segment. There's about 21 people on bicycles right next to this area, and no one really pays attention. They have no bike lane, they have nothing. And then there's 50 to 60 people on these transit vehicles that you don't notice because they also don't have their own lane either, and they're stuck behind traffic and stuck behind other cars. Don't worry about this figure below, that's the subway, that's a whole bunch of other people, but they have their right of way and they're happy, and they're like, this is great. But the people on the street are really mad because they're not getting the respect that they expect to get based on the users, and it really creates an equity issue because as a transportation policy and elected official, what you're basically saying is that these people in cars are actually more important than these people, and that's not our job. Our job is all of these people are important and they're all equal in the public right-of-way. So it's just something to understand about it. Unless you read the street this way, you still think that it's important to move people in cars because the good people drive and everybody else is an eco-liberal hippie, you know? And that's not the case. Everybody pays taxes, everybody contributes to the economy, and everybody deserves access to the right-of-way, and we need to allocate the space accordingly. And so what we did in San Francisco, we said, okay, how do we shift this paradigm? We decided that we were going to change the way that we think of our streets, and we basically scrubbed the street of its lane markings and looked at it from fresh eyes and said, who's using the street and how do they contribute to all of those goals? And we found out very quickly that people who ride their bicycle or a form of a bicycle or a unicycle or monowheel, whatever it is, occupy the least amount of space and give the greatest benefit for everybody else. When people bicycle, everybody wins because it helps on so many levels, right? When people take transit, they use the least amount of space to move the most amount of people, and they deserve space as well. And then what's left over is for people who actually have their own car and their own space. But we have to give some space for them as well. But it's not the other way around. And we decided to say, well, transit moves the most people. We're going to roll out the red carpet. We call these our red carpet lanes. Bicyclists and users of different modes like that, they help everybody, the environment, the air, the economy, etc. So we're going to roll out the green carpet for them. So we had a red carpet and green carpet program with dedicated pickup and drop-off spots. We also changed our on-street parking program because on-street parking is this weird thing where we're giving a public resource mainly to private vehicle owners. And the public right-of-way is actually not for that. The public right-of-way is for the public, not for the private car owner. And it's really hard to turn your mind on it, but that's the reality of the situation. So most of our merchants and our storefronts were saying, well, why can't we have people to use more of the right-of-way? We don't have enough room on the sidewalk to put our chairs and tables. Why can't we use the parking spot to turn it into a parklet, which basically is a temporary deck, so we can actually have more people to sit out there and eat and enjoy the scenery. So this is what we did to many of our streets. We basically converted the one car parking spot that was being reserved for one person and allowed 15 to 20 people to actually enjoy that space all day long. You don't have to buy anything from the stores. You can actually sit there and not have to buy anything. You can just do your homework or sit outside and enjoy it. We converted the spaces around it to bike corrals, where one car parking space can be converted to a 16 bike or an 8 bike parking facility. Because we were the Department of Transportation, we're about vehicles. In California, a car and a bicycle are a vehicle. And so when people would challenge us and say, oh, no, we didn't take away one vehicle space, we added 16 vehicle spaces to that site, right? Language is really important, how you think about this. You have to defend that language because you'll be questioned time and time again. We also started to change the street operations. Every Sunday during certain periods, we would allow people to basically use the street for themselves and not for cars. And so we call this the Sunday Streets program. And people would say things to us like, I've never walked on this street before, or I can hear the birds in my neighborhood for the first time. I can hear people's high heels. I can hear people talking. I can hear people laughing. I can hear kids playing, because all you hear is the roar of traffic before. So this is your opportunity as a transportation and policy makers to really give the space back to the people so that everybody can use this. It goes back to car use later on, there's no problem, but during certain times of the year, it's good to give it back to the people to enjoy it. And this is the Embarcadero. So this used to be that double-decker freeway that you saw. They used to carry about 80,000 people a day on it. On one of our Sunday streets, we had 250,000 people on it. Again, moving people versus moving vehicles. And this opened up a lot of ideas for many cities around the world on how you can repurpose your streets just for a weekend so people can actually see the delight and the joy back in their daily activities. Some people had never ridden a bicycle before. We had a lot of bike training workshops. We had skateboarding. We had all the different things about just to get people to see and how to have joy back in transport. We also did some surveys with the merchants, because not all the merchants loved this. Most merchants hated this and thought that it was the end of the world. And so we sat down with the merchants and said, how is your business doing with these chains in the street? Oh, it's awful, it's terrible, you've put me out of business, it's gone. They were there the next month, and they're the following month and the following month. I thought you were out of business, you're still here. So they were very concerned about our program. So what we started doing is we started surveying all of the customers coming in and out of all of these stores and said, how did you get here? How are you getting from here? And then how much did you spend? If you don't mind asking us, how much did you spend here? We found that time and time again, the merchants thought that everybody came by car and all the car drivers spent the most money, but actually the people who came by bicycle, by public transport, or who just walked there actually spent more money per month. That was a shock for the merchants because they'd never thought that way, and they started tweaking their business models to accommodate and cater for that public rather than the driving public. So really be careful about your assumptions. Just because it looks like it's full of people, we're not sure exactly how they got there unless you ask them. And you'll be surprised how many people would actually go to these stores if there was bike parking in front of it, or if there was more pleasant walking environments and other bicycle infrastructure, or better bus stops. You'd be amazed how many people would actually see those stores that normally wouldn't see them. So it's just always important to use data, because without data you have anecdotes, and anecdata is just hearsay. You need data to tell you what's really happening. You need to measure it, otherwise you don't know what to do. And the old saying is true, we treasure what we measure. If you don't measure it, you won't treasure it. So it's really important to measure it. And then on the cycling, which is the area that had the most political confrontation, I will never forget how many people came out of the woodwork. These people who don't exist normally, that never come to any community meeting, but for some reason, like a cadaver in the middle of the night, they just like rise up from nowhere and come out and say, this is the end of the world. You're putting in a bike lane, you're killing our city. And you know, most of us who are trained in this world, like, I can't understand what you're saying, let me think about what you're saying. So this ecologically sustainable transport mode that requires the least amount of space and the least amount of infrastructure and the least investment with the greatest public health benefit is going to kill the city? Excuse me? I don't understand. So that was one of the lessons there. I hope this is conversations you've had before in the city as well. Okay, good, because this is not normal to, this is not unusually San Francisco, this is everywhere. But we have to have those conversations because change is hard and people hate change. And everybody wants the world to be better as long as they don't have to do anything about it. And that's a real reality we have in our world. So we have to think about, well, how do we do it together? Because we can't do it by ourselves. Data was really important. We have to show our citizens that the bike network is really fragmented and dangerous because it's not safe for everybody to use. We took a whole bunch of people on our engineer-approved bike routes. Our engineers said, bike network's great, it's fine, look at it, it's just all, it goes everywhere. But when we took people who were older than us, who didn't look like me, who were different ages, sizes, abilities, backgrounds, ethnicity, etc., we got some very direct feedback that said, I don't go through this area because it feels dangerous, I don't like this intersection, I don't like that intersection. And we developed this thing called the level of traffic stress. And the level of traffic stress is basically a ranking of each segment of bikeway and each gap and how difficult people feel as they go through those segments. So the bright green or the dark green areas are where everybody feels comfortable, whether you're 12 years old or 90 years old. And the red segments is where no one feels comfortable. We call those the tolerated by the strong and the fearless. That's the ones who feel comfortable. And then level 2 and 3 are the ones where most adults are comfortable, and level 3 is where only experienced bike riders feel comfortable. So it helped us prioritize where we should put our resources, and our board decided that we should focus on closing all of those red gaps. That's really the worst of the worst, and then we'll add to it over time. And what we'll do is we'll actually show through data that as we looked at this is one of our busiest bike routes, we would look and say, okay, look at all these segments. So this is the busiest bike corridor. Over 10,000 cyclists a day are going through here. How can we close the worst? And the worst gaps were in the hardest part, which is the downtown area. And we had some very hard decisions and discussions, and that's where we took the private vehicles out. as we made those changes, we started seeing these areas that I've highlighted out here. These were the gaps, the red gap areas, and you can see the rate of bicycle growth just in those sectors because it made the whole corridor more bikeable just by taking out those. We call these alligator pits or cliffs. We basically closed out those cliffs and drained the alligator pits so we could get people to get through the corridor. And we found that the results happened fairly quickly. Our first data count was in 2004, and in 2004, this is Market Street. Market Street had no bike lanes. These are actually car parking stalls that the bike lane's in right now. And in 2004, there was 1 bicycle measured for every 3 cars on the street. And by 2016, we had flipped it to 4 bicycles for every 1 car on the street. So we had a massive shift from people. These, by the way, this is the 5 p.m. commute. These are, this is the 5 p.m. commute. These are not like your average whatever. These are workers. These work in the city, they're working, they're going home. So one of the examples we always show here is that it's important to note that everybody now, with a more rationalized approach to the street, everything actually moves better. Collisions are down, performance is up, and people are enjoying the feeling of being not only protected and safe to ride their bicycle, but acknowledged and respected to ride their bicycle. On public transport, we really want to focus on a more inclusive transportation system. Public transport had a lot of ideas during this process. We spent a lot of time thinking about what we could do. Everybody wants to build more subways, they want to build more bus rapid transit, they want to build all these really expensive things, which are amazing and wonderful and needed, but they're going to take 20 years to build, and we don't have the money for them. And so we developed a long-term network to increase the system. We posted in different languages. We asked all different users to tell us what they want. We agreed that the red network was the high-capacity rail network, the blue network was the high-capacity BRT and light rail network, and that was our long-term vision. Long-term visions are fairly easy to bring in, and it's a nice drawing, it's a nice map, but that's going to take forever to build. So we instead said, okay, we want to challenge the status quo here and say, what can we do in 6 months? What can we do in 12 months to improve public transport? That changed the conversation because 1/3 of the subway and rail advocates left the room. And everybody that was left was the daily transit users themselves, our core customers, right? So we said, okay, what can we do to improve the transport system? They said, for goodness sake, let us board the bus on every door. Why do we have to board the bus from the front? It's such a stupid, outdated thing. And we have data to show you that it's exceeding 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes of dwell time, which is the time it takes to board, at each stop. So if we could just allow people to get on any door and make their way to pay while they're on the bus, that should help bus speeds. In fact, it did. It improved overall dwell time. And the fare evasion wasn't even really a factor because the minuscule amount of fare evasion more than compensated for the improvement in bus speeds and bus performance. So that was done in 6 months, really easy to do. Buying more transit fleet, we're already getting that, so we could say, yay, victory, but that wasn't really real, but I put that in there anyway. But more importantly for it was the usability of the system. We have over 100 transit routes in the city, and some transit engineer in the 60s decided to make 50 different colors and lines and that sort of stuff. And you need a PhD to figure out how to use the transit system. It's such a difficult thing. It's got numbers, it's got letters, it's got all these things that people don't really understand and can't legibly read. And we decided to do 2 things to make it very, very legible. This was through a crowd operation of bringing everybody in. We changed the whole map network to 2 colors. Remember those red and the blue before? Red lines, whether it's a rail or a bus service, comes every 5 minutes in the peak period. Don't worry about a timetable, don't worry about schedule, just show and go. Blue lines come every 10 to 15 minutes in the peak period. Know which ones they are. That's all you need to know. Red and blue. Every 5 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And that kind of just changed the way people actually understood public transport, and that's how it looks on the street. So you know the 38R is a rapid line, it comes every 5 minutes and it stops certain stops, whereas the local comes every 10 to 15 minutes and it stops every stop. Super simple. The next step is to get rid of all the numbers and just have them all in direction so that people know where are these buses going. I can't tell you how many people are at our bus stop saying, there's 9 buses coming on the stop, but I don't know where they're going. I really don't understand where they're going. They all told me we're heading east. At least I know I'm somewhere heading east. I can just hop on any one of those buses and not wait for my specific bus. The other thing is we went mobile, and we added a digital payment program so you could pay on the phone, because we have these smartphones now so you can use them. And then we did a brand new service where we kind of did a Yelp My Ride. So we basically asked people to rate the ride of their transit experience, which is the first time the transit agency thought about its actual real customers, not its elected officials and the Federal Transit Administration, which it thinks are its customers. Its actual customers are the users of the system that create those numbers for them. So we got to actually see people rate the ride. Was it positive? Was it negative? What was good about it? What was bad about it? And if we got a lot of negatives in a certain area, we could target the transit operations team to go there and check it out. What's going on in that particular area? So they really started to enjoy it because it gave them ability to prioritize rather than doing a whack-a-mole where they have to fix 500 things at the same time. So it's a really, again, much more customer-oriented approach of doing things. Now with shared mobility, San Francisco is like the hotbed of shared mobility. It's been that way for a long time, whether it's car sharing, ride hailing, scooter sharing, moped sharing, mini car sharing, van sharing, corporate sharing, blah, blah, blah. All the sharings, lots of sharing. A lot of them are brand new, some haven't made it, some grew, some didn't last. The point is the city of San Francisco has always figured out ways to work with them, even if we may disagree with them initially. What every city likes is when these new companies approach them and say, these are my plans, these are my ideas, how can we work together? What every city can't stand is when a peekaboo happens. All of a sudden they're here, they just landed, and it's a horrible mess because no one knew about it, no one can accommodate it, and we've seen that recently with some of the new mobility options. The key is they're probably not going to go away, and so what is the way to accommodate them in a way that's safe for everybody? That's really the fundamental decision point. You can ban things, but they'll figure out a way to come back, and they always do. So it's just one of those things, you can say no to these different services, and you can do that, but realistically, it's better to say, how can we work together, and here are the rules of engagement. Linking all of these different transit systems is a headache for people. We talk about this mobility as a service where we can link everything together, but it's quite a headache. And we have this ability to just link it with an app, so why don't we do that? So let's get the brain power and the brainstream of Cornell University to help us just figure this out. You know, some 20-year-olds can spend a couple of days and just figure this out. It's not that difficult. So let's just get the information that we need when we need it, so it actually works for us, and not try and reinvent the wheel every time. And look at the way that you can accommodate these different services and help them grow if they're going to meet your needs. If you're very clear about what your goals are and these new services align with those goals, for goodness sake, help them scale so they can actually affect change. Whether it is, like with car sharing, for example, we knew that they aligned with our goals, so we worked really hard to have them scale. Same with moped sharing, because it was a new service that was very space efficient and electric, and it helped people get there. And with bike sharing, we helped the system scale. It started off with 700 bicycles as a pilot. Now it's going to be 7,000 bicycles, because it shows value to the overall transport system. If the opposite is true, then work with them to figure out how to actually achieve and align your goals. But without your goals being very clear and upfront, you're not going to be able to say whether something is good or bad. All you're going to have is an emotional response. And emotional responses don't last very long, because people do change their minds and their ideas, and then they've already moved on. So, but if you can have your goals consistent and clear, you'll be able to help people out. So, all that's to say is that we met that mode share goal that we set out in 2011, but we met it 3 years earlier. We were supposed to meet in 2018, we actually met it in 2015. We were so surprised by the data, we had to engage with the University of California, Berkeley, statisticians, and say, did this really happen? Like, is this real? Because it's not supposed to happen for another 3 years. And they said, no, in fact, your data is correct, and it's actually happened. So we were very proud of that. But typical fashion San Francisco said, that's nice, what else are you going to do for us? So that was yesterday, today's a new day, what are you going to do for me? So that's the love that you get as a transportation planner, so that's okay. But now what's been really great is that they've changed these goals to 25 and 75, so a new benchmark now. So we're going to get to 80 and 90 and hopefully 100, but step by step by step, and I hope that's the message that we're saying. And then now the path forward, like, okay, that was all the San Francisco thing. Now, as we move forward, what do we do? Well, we have a new mayor, first-time black woman who's going to be our mayor of San Francisco. And she was one of our first advocates for a more equitable use of our street. These are some of our storm channels that we built in, our rain gardens. And that's the sort of leadership that we're looking for, is like, how do we start this process to now go to the next step? We were also accredited as the most inclusive and diverse public agency, which is a really good award to have. And that helps, again, empower people to think differently and think different ways. And with these new technologies and new services, it's starting to, again, bring up all of that stuff from 2011 and 12 of what do we do with these new technologies. But this time round, we're prepared. We were caught off guard by Uber and Lyft 8 years ago or 7 years ago. Now we're prepared. And so that's why when these companies approached San Francisco, this company on the right, which is an electric bike share company, approached San Francisco and said, how do we work together to create a permit? Because we had long-time friendship with this company and they knew the rules of the game. These guys didn't. And they said, here we are, poof, how cool it is. And the city said, wait a second, hold up. We need to think about this for a little bit. The city stepped back and thought about it and said, okay, here are the rules of the parameters of the program, and now we'll invite you in. And 11 companies applied, and 6 companies are actually operating right now, and some of them didn't qualify. So again, it's very important to say, I understand what you want to do, but here are my rules. Here are my needs, and then if you can meet my rules and my needs, you're welcome into our city, but you have to abide by our rules. And so that's the difference between what happened many years ago and what's happening today in the city. We also work very closely with the development community to figure out, is there a way that we can start shifting people out of car ownership? What is the way to do that? And I think one of the things we decided to do was, rather than tell developers what to do, we actually asked them to help us figure out how to do it. And we didn't initiate this, we initiated this conversation, but we didn't initiate this requirement. But a developer basically said, I will offer $100 per month transport, a mobility pass to every new resident of my development if and only if they agree to give up their car. And he thought he was going to get about 2 or 3 people to sign up. He doesn't have enough membership programs to give out. Everybody's saying, I'm willing to move to your development if I can give up my car. So we should never underestimate the ability of people to change if we provide them the real options. And the only reason why people said yes to this was because the bike lanes, the bus lanes, the bike share, the car share all work well enough that they can see there is an actual alternative. If they don't work, folks, there's nothing for people to shift to. So we can't just ask everyone to do that if there's no that for them to do. So just remember that. Okay, drones and stuff. Yes, this stuff's happening. Have to be very careful about it. Watch it, understand it, be prepared for it. Again, follow the rules, follow the needs, and make sure that we don't do anything that's going to make things worse. Transport safety, though, is a real problem. We're starting to see a lot of the issues here. We need to figure out what to do. Unfortunately, in traffic safety, we blame this person and don't blame this person. It's both their fault. This person can't really kill people. This person can kill a lot of people. Okay, it's that simple. Person driving cars don't drive themselves. How many times has your local newspaper said car killed or car collided with something? The car didn't do anything. The person driving the car caused the crash, right? And it's not an accident. There's no accidents. It's a collision. The words are really important. So, stop blaming this person. Yes, they shouldn't be doing this, but how many times have you done it yourself? Not good. Really, really bad. You look at kids about, don't put your fingers in the light socket. This is really bad, right? So just think about that. Looking at ways to figure out ways we can link more of our technologies together so it actually works for people. These are just some ideas about the mobility as a service idea. Understand that we want to start integrating all the modes together so that they all work regardless of what it is, regardless of how new the technology is. And then we want to figure out ways to integrate the system so that it actually works for everybody, not just for the very few. So these are some of the ideas I've been looking at. Looking at automation, I used to work at Google X and seeing on how can we make the technology actually work safer for everybody. It's so brand new, there's so many questions, but the reality is that because of the differences we've had in our past in how technologies work, now we have some better understanding of what we need. It's less so much what the technology can do, it's more about, do we need this technology and where do we really need it? I think that's the really big discussion. Again, just some on the technology on how it works. And then I want to close here by talking about the space on our street. When we look at space on our street, it's very important. I'll show you some examples, but just I want you to think about it in a very simple way. Regardless of whether you're a bike advocate or a car advocate or any advocate, I really don't like the word pedestrian, bicyclist, or motorist. It's very ist, and it's very separating and very divisive. I like to use the word people. Sometimes we're on a bicycle, sometimes we're in a vehicle, sometimes we're in a bus, sometimes we're walking, right? So people. But the reality is that a person takes up about 1 square yard, depending on how much breakfast you've had, right? So it's about 1 square yard we take up. When you're on a bicycle or some sort of device with 2 wheels, it's about less than 2 yards, really efficient use of space. But when you're in a car, a typical car, you're taking up 8 times the space of a person on the street. That's a really inefficient use of our space, and our streets are what we have. We don't really have the ability to make those streets any bigger, nor should we. So every time you get in that discussion, just think, what are we doing? Are we about moving people, or are we about moving vehicles? Because we really should be about moving people. And just looking on the street itself, you can see a person people walking, people bicycling, people in a bus, people in a car. The space is used very different on the street. So, you know, more of this and less of this, please. That's really how you look at that. It's a big shift to think about this, because you might be thinking, well, that's crazy, how can you do that? Well, that's what you have to be thinking about as we shift. As we go into new ways of being in different spaces, the vehicle itself is going to be important in the future as well. How we interact in a large environment like a transit vehicle versus a vehicle, it's a smaller vehicle, it's going to create different opportunities in how we feel and think about things. And as think about our street space in the future, right now we dedicate too much space to the private automobile, and we know that as we've seen that. But depending on where you are in the world of the urban environment, this may be how it stays for you, and you may change a few things, or you may decide to change it and have a different system where you're really focusing on people moving by their feet, moving by different small bicycle modes of some sort, and then some sort of low capacity and a high capacity vehicle, so that the street can actually be more effective. These are really your decision points, and whether you need in a rural area to get to a high point transit system, or from an existing area to another area, all these first and last mile, the first and last 3 miles or 5 miles, these are the things that you need to think about and how you stitch the transport system together. And then from a governance perspective, matching all those modes together is very difficult, but it's going to be necessary as you start thinking about how to make this work as one system for everybody. And again, the governance layer is going to be very important. So I want to just close by saying that there are big changes coming in cities with transportation. It's going to affect land use, it's going to affect street design, it's going to affect parking. Parking will be changed in the future. We're not going to need as much parking with a lot of these new services that are popping up. We will need to store a lot of these new technologies somewhere, so they most likely will go in the parking garages. But there will be a shift in how we use these spaces. But the important thing is to have the right performance measures so we can actually do this. So hopefully we can go from these situations to these situations, and then not just all of this work for the city centres, but also for the suburbs and the rural towns and the rural areas, because it's going to be very different for each part of the spectrum of our state. And we really do need to think about how we can actually make sure that we can still focus on government being a force for good, because that's really the adjudicator for this. So I'm going to close there and then leave it open for questions as well. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.